AITA for letting the house get disgusting to prove a point to my roommate. She didn't clean at all and blamed me for the mess. I, 26F, have been living with my roommate, Jenna, 27F, for about a year and a half now. We met through mutual friends, you know, one of those situations where you have a couple of fun nights out together, realize you both need a place around the same time, and think, why not? At first, it felt like it was going to be one of those ideal roommate situations people always talk about but never actually experience. We got along well enough. She's pretty outgoing, always down for a spontaneous happy hour, and our schedules were eerily similar, which helped with not constantly stepping on each other's toes. For the most part, we respected each other's space and had a good dynamic going. But there was one thing, one persistent, gnawing little issue that I noticed pretty much right from the beginning: cleaning. Now, I'm not someone who scrubs the grout with a toothbrush for fun, but I do have a pretty basic standard for cleanliness. Wipe the counters if you spill something, don't leave food crusted onto plates, and for the love of all that is holy, do not let your hair accumulate in the shower drain until it looks like some creature from the deep. Unfortunately, Jenna does not seem to operate with those same basic principles. From day one, it just kind of fell to me to handle most of the cleaning. I didn't even make a conscious decision to do it, it just happened. Dishes would pile up, and I'd think, okay, I'll just do them real quick so the sink doesn't start to smell. The bathroom would get that gross layer of humidity grime, and I'd be the one grabbing a sponge. The floors would start to feel sticky under my feet, and next thing I knew, I'd have a broom in hand. It wasn't that I particularly enjoy cleaning, I don't, but there's a certain level of filth I just can't comfortably coexist with. And at first, I figured maybe Jenna just didn't notice the messes the way I did. That's a real thing, some people just have a much higher tolerance for clutter and grime, and I was willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. So I kept tidying up, assuming she'd eventually catch on. Like, if she saw me vacuuming or wiping down the counters, maybe it would spark something in her. Maybe she'd think, hey, I should probably pitch in too. Spoiler alert, she did not. It was like she lived in some alternate reality where dishes magically disappeared and the floors stayed clean on their own. Over time, it started to grate on me. Not just the physical labor of doing everything, but the fact that she never even seemed to register that I was doing it. There was no, hey, thanks for mopping, or I appreciate you taking care of the bathroom. It was like the cleaning fairy just stopped by every few days and took care of everything. I tried to be chill about it at first, I really did. I'd make casual comments like, hey, do you mind grabbing the vacuum today? Or we should probably take turns cleaning the bathroom so it doesn't get gross. She'd always respond the same way, all wide-eyed and enthusiastic, saying, oh, for sure. Absolutely. And then, nothing. No vacuuming. No bathroom scrubbing. No acknowledgement that the conversation even happened. And look, I'm not perfect either. I've left my share of dishes in the sink after a long day or let the recycling pile up longer than it should. But the difference is, I actually do something about it once I notice. Jenna, on the other hand, seems to have some magical ability to step over the same pile of crumbs for days on end without ever feeling compelled to grab a broom. The real breaking point, the moment that flipped the switch in my brain from annoyed to absolutely livid, happened about 2 weeks ago. I was in my room, chilling on my bed, scrolling mindlessly on my phone, when I heard her voice coming from the living room. She was on FaceTime with a couple of our mutual friends, the same ones who originally introduced us. I wasn't intentionally eavesdropping, but our walls are thin and she wasn't exactly being quiet. What I heard stopped me dead. She was telling them how exhausting it was being the only one who ever cleaned the apartment. I sat up so fast I nearly dropped my phone. She was going on and on about how she felt like she was constantly picking up the slack, always the one wiping down counters and taking out the trash and keeping the place livable. One of our friends even said something like, wow, that sounds exhausting, and Jenna was just like, yeah, you have no idea. I was stunned. I mean, was this some elaborate joke? Was there a hidden camera somewhere? I could feel my pulse in my ears, and I just sat there, stewing, while she continued painting this imaginary picture where she was our household's unsung hero. Then, and this is the part that really sent me into orbit, she told her mom the same thing later that night. I heard her on the phone, casually complaining to her mom about how hard it was to keep everything nice when her roommate didn't care about cleanliness. I thought I might actually burst a blood vessel. That night, when she finally emerged from her room, I couldn't hold it in. I asked her, kind of jokingly because I wanted to gauge her reaction, if she really thought she did all the cleaning around here. She laughed, like it was the most ridiculous question she'd ever heard, and said, "Well, I mean, I do my part." There was no hesitation. No trace of irony. She actually believed it. I just nodded, deciding right then and there that I was done. If Jenna really thinks she's the one keeping this place together, I'm officially retiring. No more sweeping up her crumbs, no more wiping down counters she leaves sticky, no more scooping her hair out of the drain so the water doesn't back up. I'm done. From now on, she can prove it. I want to see how she cleans. Update 1. So, I stopped cleaning. Completely. I didn't announce it, I didn't make some grand proclamation, I just stopped. No wiping down the counters after breakfast, no sweeping up the little bits of dirt and hair that always seemed to accumulate near the front door, no collecting her half-empty coffee cups from the living room. I let everything sit exactly where it landed, no matter how sticky, gross, or straight-up embarrassing it became. It didn't take long for the apartment to start showing the cracks. The dishes were the first and most obvious casualty. They piled up in the sink, bowls with dried-up oatmeal glued to the sides, spoons stuck to plates with some kind of mystery sauce, coffee mugs with that ring of congealed milk at the bottom. The smell hit first, that warm, sour scent of neglected dishes that wafts up every time you walk into the kitchen. At first, I avoided the kitchen entirely just so I wouldn't have to look at it, but eventually, it almost became funny. I'd walk past, glance at the tower of dirty dishes, and think, this is what you wanted, Jenna. The bathroom was next. I stopped wiping down the sink after I brushed my teeth, so toothpaste specks started building up in little constellations on the mirror and sink basin. Stray hairs, mine and hers, formed a dark halo around the drain, and the water started pooling instead of draining because neither of us had cleared it out in days. The floor collected a fine layer of hair, dust and God knows what else, and that damp, mildewy smell started to creep into the air because the shower curtain stayed bunched up instead of being spread out to dry properly. I didn't touch any of it. The floors throughout the apartment transformed into a timeline of our week. Little crumbs from toast on Monday, a smear of something unidentifiable from Wednesday's takeout, a sticky ring where one of her friends had set down a drink on Friday. Dust bunnies turned into full-on dust wolves, gathering under the couch, in corners, even creeping along the baseboards like they were preparing for a coup. I didn't sweep. I didn't vacuum. I didn't care. At first, Jenna didn't seem to notice, and that part actually stunned me more than the mess itself. She carried on like nothing was wrong, eating her cereal out of the one clean bowl she fished from the sink and setting it right back into the ever-growing dish mountain when she was done. She'd kick off her shoes and leave them in the middle of the living room, step right over a pile of her own hair that had been there for days, and go sit on the couch without a second glance. It was like living with someone who had completely shut off the part of their brain that processes filth. But after about a week, I caught the first crack in her oblivious facade. I was sitting on the couch, minding my own business, when she stood in the middle of the living room, looked around, and said, "Wow, the place is kind of a mess." Her tone was casual, like she was observing the weather, but I could see the slight wrinkle of her nose. I just said, "Yeah, weird, right?" She didn't respond to that. She just muttered something about being busy lately, grabbed a disinfecting wipe, and half-heartedly swiped it across one section of the counter before sighing dramatically and collapsing back onto the couch with her phone. That single swipe was the only cleaning she did. Another week passed, and I could tell the mess was starting to get to her. She spent more time in her room with the door closed, which I assumed was her way of escaping the communal disaster zone we had co-created. I, on the other hand, had fully embraced the chaos. I refused to blink first, no matter how gross things got. I ate out more often just to avoid adding to the dish pile or confronting it directly. I brushed my teeth in my bedroom with a water bottle some nights just so I didn't have to stare at the toothpaste apocalypse in the bathroom sink. Finally, the tension boiled over. One night, Jenna came into my room, hovering awkwardly in the doorway, and asked in this sweet but strained voice, "So, are you planning on doing the dishes at some point?" Her whole body language was that fake casual, but I could tell she was pissed. I didn't even look up from my phone. I just said, "Oh, I thought you were the one keeping things clean." That sentence hit her like a slap to the face. Her eyes narrowed, her arms crossed, and she launched into this defensive monologue about how she does clean. She just does it in a less obvious way, and it's not her fault if I only notice the things I think are important. She accused me of being petty and childish for letting the place go to hell just to make a point, which, okay, fair, but also, what point do you think I'm making if you actually clean like you say you do? I stayed calm, or at least I tried to, and just said I assumed she'd keep doing what she said she'd been doing all along, you know, keeping the place livable, picking up all the slack, being the unsung household hero. If that was her reality, why should me stepping back change anything? She rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might actually get stuck, said I was making things uncomfortable for no reason, and stormed back to her room. The door slam was the punctuation on her tantrum. Since then, we've been living in this Cold War state, circling around each other in our increasingly disgusting apartment. I can see it's getting to her. She's spending more time out of the apartment entirely, going to friends' places, staying later at work, probably because being home means confronting the reality that her domestic goddess delusion was never real to begin with. I don't love living in a dirty apartment either, but I'm not cleaning up just so she can keep pretending she's the responsible one. So now I'm sitting here, surrounded by a week-old pizza box, a pile of unclaimed mail, and a truly horrifying bathroom, wondering if I took it too far. AITA for letting the apartment turn into a disaster just to prove a point. Update 2. I thought the silent war between Jenna and me would just stretch on indefinitely, both of us tiptoeing around the mess, side-eyeing each other across piles of dirty dishes and dust, stubbornly refusing to be the first one to break. I had mentally prepared for weeks, maybe even months of passive-aggressive avoidance, but everything shifted on a random Tuesday afternoon when our mutual friend Lauren unexpectedly showed up at the door. Lauren wasn't supposed to be there long. She had messaged earlier saying she was nearby and could swing by to drop off my sweatshirt, the one she accidentally took home after the bachelorette party we all went to a few weekends ago. That was it, a quick handoff, maybe a couple of minutes of polite small talk at the door. And even though I knew our apartment currently looked like a cross between a college frat house and the aftermath of a tornado, I didn't bother tidying up. I wasn't about to frantically shove things into closets or light a candle to cover up the vaguely sour smell creeping out of the kitchen. If anything, I figured Lauren deserved to see the reality of what I'd been living with. When I opened the door, the first thing I saw was her nose twitching slightly as the stale, unwashed air hit her. It wasn't overwhelming. It wasn't like we were hoarders living in squalor, but there was an undeniable funk that had settled into the place. Old food smells, damp bathroom towels, and that general mustiness that comes when no one bothers to open a window or wipe down a surface for weeks. Lauren stepped inside, and I caught the briefest flash of discomfort on her face before she plastered on a polite smile. She gave that little nervous laugh people do when they're trying not to comment on something they can't quite ignore, the kind of laugh that says, "Oh wow, what do I even say to this?" But none of that was the real gut punch. That came a few seconds later when Lauren, still standing awkwardly near the door, casually mentioned that now it made sense why Jenna had been whining all week about me refusing to clean. She said it so offhandedly, like it was common knowledge, and I swear I felt my entire body freeze in place. My brain stalled for a second, just trying to process the fact that Jenna had already been spinning her own version of events to our mutual friends, the same friends who had introduced us, the ones we both still hung out with. And in her version, she was the heroic victim, the tireless cleaner who had been abandoned by her moody, childish roommate who decided to launch some kind of personal strike for no reason other than pettiness. Hearing it out loud, framed so casually like it was just the accepted truth, made my blood absolutely boil. It wasn't even the fact that she had vented, everyone complains about their roommates, it was how smoothly she had rewritten history, turning herself into some put-upon martyr and me into the unreasonable villain. I could feel my hands shaking a little from sheer anger, but I kept my face neutral, just nodding along as Lauren chatted, all while my mind was racing. That was when I decided I was done letting Jenna control the narrative. Without even really thinking it through, I grabbed my phone, opened up our group chat, the one with all our mutual friends, including Jenna herself, and started typing. I didn't hold back. I laid out everything, right there in black and white for everyone to see. From the moment we moved in together, when I slowly realized I was the only one cleaning, to the countless gentle nudges I gave her to pitch in, to her constant promises to get to it that never materialized. I didn't even bother making it emotional. I kept it clinical, just a factual retelling of the slow decline from hopeful roommates to passive-aggressive Cold War, culminating in my decision to stop cleaning entirely to see if she would step up. I included the cherry on top, her FaceTime performance where she painted herself as the domestic savior of our apartment, the one who single-handedly kept our home functioning, and how I had heard it all from my room. I explained that the mess Lauren had just walked into wasn't the result of some tantrum I threw out of nowhere, but the natural consequence of me stepping back and refusing to carry both our weight for once. Jenna saw the message almost immediately. Her little profile icon popped up at the bottom of the chat, indicating she was reading. But instead of responding, no excuses, no attempts to defend herself, she just silently left the group. 1 second her name was there, the next it was gone, and with it any attempt on her part to salvage the story she had been so carefully curating behind my back. Lauren, standing beside me, just gave a little shrug and said at least now everyone knows. And that was that. No dramatic blowout fight, no yelling or crying, just silence, which somehow felt more damning than any argument could have. For the next 2 days, Jenna didn't come home at all. I have no idea where she went, maybe her sister's place, maybe a friend's couch, but the apartment stayed empty except for me and the mess. When she finally returned, she didn't say a word to me. She walked in with her arms full of cleaning supplies, sprays, sponges, brushes, even one of those little grout cleaning toothbrushes, which was particularly ironic considering how many times I had silently cursed her for ignoring the bathroom grout for months. And then she started cleaning. Not in the half-hearted, surface-wiping way she used to. This was full-blown, deep cleaning fury. She scrubbed every inch of the apartment like she was trying to erase not just the mess, but the entire history of our living situation. She attacked the bathtub with bleach, scraped dried food off the counters, vacuumed every inch of the floor, even hauled out bags of trash I hadn't realized were still lurking in the back of the kitchen. I sat on the couch the entire time, sipping coffee and watching her. I didn't lift a single finger. I just sat there and let her do it, because for the first time in our entire time living together, it was actually her responsibility. By the time she finished, hours later, the apartment was almost unrecognizable. It was sparkling, the kind of clean it probably hadn't been since we first moved in. Jenna, on the other hand, looked like she had just crawled out of a war zone. Her hair was plastered to her face with sweat, her hands were raw from scrubbing, and there was a slightly manic gleam in her eye that suggested she was on the verge of either screaming or bursting into tears. She didn't say anything to me. She just locked herself in her room without so much as a glance in my direction. Exactly a week later, she told me she was moving in with her sister because she needed a fresh start. She said it in that flat, rehearsed tone people use when they've already made the decision and just want to get the conversation over with. I didn't argue, didn't suggest we try to work things out. I just wished her luck, signed the paperwork to break the lease, and started looking for a new place. When she left, it was like the entire apartment exhaled. The silence was peaceful instead of tense, and the air felt cleaner, like the very walls were relieved she was gone. And me? For the first time in a year and a half, I felt like I could breathe again. I've never felt so relieved before. Update 3. I was fully ready to close the Jenna chapter of my life and never look back. After we broke the lease and went our separate ways, I felt like I had finally shed a layer of skin I didn't even realize had been suffocating me. The silence in my new apartment was blissful, not awkward, not heavy with unsaid grievances. It was the kind of silence that felt like freedom, no more waiting for her to clean something that would never be cleaned, no more second-guessing if I was being too picky or too naggy for wanting to live in a place that didn't smell like week-old takeout and damp towels. It was over. Or so I thought. About a month after she moved out, I was curled up on my couch, scrolling mindlessly through my local Facebook group called Housing in Neighbors. It was mostly the usual noise, someone trying to sell a barely functioning air fryer, another person ranting about parking violations, and the never-ending stream of passive-aggressive complaints about noise levels in nearby buildings. I wasn't even really paying attention until my eyes snagged on a very familiar profile picture. It was Jenna. The post itself was long, the kind of unhinged, oversharing vent that usually gets screen-capped and shared in group chats for entertainment. It took me a second to register what I was even looking at, but once I realized it was her, I sat up straighter, already sensing this was going to be good. Jenna was complaining, of course, but this time it wasn't about me. It was about her new neighbor. According to Jenna, this woman was completely obsessed with cleaning and expected Jenna to function at the level of a professional cleaner. The post went on and on about how she was being harassed for her perfectly normal, creative mess, and how living with someone so uptight was draining her soul. I nearly spilled my tea laughing when I saw the name. Because her new neighbor, the poor soul now trapped in Jenna's personal hygiene nightmare, was none other than Haley, one of the girls from our mutual friend group. Haley was legendary for her meticulousness. This was a woman who wiped down communal yoga mats before using them and carried her own disposable seat covers for public bathrooms. Haley once brought her own set of color-coded microfiber cloths to a weekend cabin trip because she didn't trust the provided ones. The universe has a dark sense of humor, and this was poetic. The post already had a small pile of comments, and I could tell some of our mutual friends had seen it too. No one came out and directly spilled the whole story, but there were definitely some carefully worded comments that hinted, strongly, that Jenna's track record with cleanliness was not exactly as spotless as she was trying to claim. There was a passive-aggressive masterpiece from one of our friends that said it's funny how some people always seem to have the worst luck with roommates, as if bad roommates are just falling from the sky and targeting the same person over and over. Another simply said, maybe it's time for some self-reflection, which is probably the nicest way someone could say girl, you are the problem. Jenna, true to form, started getting defensive in the comments, insisting that Haley was just one of those people who freaks out if a single crumb lands on the counter, and that expecting an adult to deep clean a bathroom weekly was borderline abusive. But it was clear the tide was not on her side, and after a few more weak attempts at justifying herself, she quietly deleted the post altogether. Unfortunately for her, nothing ever truly disappears on the internet, and I know for a fact that multiple people screenshotted it, myself included. The best part, though, came later that same evening when I got a private message from Haley herself. She wasn't even trying to be discreet, she straight up asked if I'd ever had issues with Jenna's housekeeping standards, and the moment I saw the message, I actually cackled. I ended up sending her back a novella-length response, giving her the full unvarnished history of my year and a half in Jenna's personal landfill. I included everything, the dish piles, the hair clogs, the passive-aggressive FaceTime performances, even the time I caught her wiping off the top of a moldy container with her sleeve instead of actually washing it. Haley and I spent the next hour messaging back and forth, trading horror stories and bonding over the shared trauma of living with someone who seemed to genuinely believe that dust would eventually dissolve on its own if you just ignored it long enough. At one point, Haley jokingly suggested we should start a formal club, Jenna's former neighbors support group, complete with t-shirts, themed meetings, and a motto like cleanliness is not the enemy, Jenna is. I think she was kidding, but honestly, I wouldn't be opposed. The whole thing felt so absurdly karmic. For years, Jenna had been able to craft this narrative of herself as the put-upon neat freak, constantly cleaning up after slobby roommates who didn't appreciate her. She had gotten away with it, too, because most of the people she complained to never actually lived with her. But now, not only was her reputation crumbling in front of our mutual friends, but the universe had hand-delivered her into the home of the one person who might actually out-clean a sterile hospital ward. There was something almost beautiful about the symmetry of it all. As for me, I'm still living alone, and honestly, it's everything I didn't know I needed. There are nights when I do feel a little lonely, when I'd love someone to split a pizza with or just sit on the couch watching bad reality TV, but then I walk into my kitchen and see an empty sink and a sparkling counter, and all that loneliness evaporates. Every time I take out the trash, I don't have to wonder how long it's been sitting there or who's going to be the one to cave and do it. There's a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the space I live in reflects only my habits, my standards, my effort. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that I will never, ever, let someone gaslight me into believing that basic hygiene is unreasonable again. Cleanliness isn't a personality flaw, and wanting to live in a space that doesn't feel like a biohazard isn't controlling, it's just being a functional adult. And yes, I am definitely not AITA.